Lindsey Vonn reveals she nearly had leg amputated after scary Olympics crash. Lindsey Vonn reveals she nearly had leg amputated after scary Olympics crash. Appeared first on Clutch Points. Add Clutch Points as a preferred source by clicking here. Lindsey Vonn's left leg injury looked bad enough, but the US skiing legend has just admitted that the outcome could have been much worse. Vonn took to Instagram on Monday to detail just how bad her injuries were after crashing during a women's downhill event at the 2026 Winter Olympics. At the February 8 event, Vonn clipped a gate and sailed off the course just 13 seconds into her run, suffering a complex tibia fracture in her left leg and breaking her right ankle. But the 41-year-old has now revealed that the trauma her leg suffered led to compartment syndrome, which happens when pressure from bleeding or swelling builds up inside a muscle and restricts blood flow to an area of the body. When you have so much trauma to one area of your body so that there's too much blood and it gets stuck, and it basically crushes everything, Vonn said. Vonn said that if the compartment syndrome hadn't been treated as soon as possible, there would have been permanent damage, and she would have needed to have her leg amputated. She then gave credit to the orthopedic surgeon who saved her from losing her left leg. "Dr. Tom Hackett saved my leg. He saved my leg from being amputated," Vonn said. "He filleted it open, and let it breathe, and he saved me," she said. Dr. Hackett, who works for both Team USA and Vonn personally, was already at the Olympics in Italy since Vonn tore her ACL while practicing for the Olympics. Vonn also credited that incident for ultimately helping her out in the long run. "If I hadn't had torn my ACL, Tom wouldn't have been there, and he wouldn't have been able to save my leg," she said. Becoming the Mountain, Lindsey Vonn's dance with danger and destiny. It isn't often a champion comes face to face with the very thing they live to master. For most athletes, danger lurks at the edges of their craft, a whisper at dawn, a shadow at the finish line. But for Lindsey Vonn, one crisp winter day in Italy, danger didn't whisper, it roared. She had already defied expectations that season. At 41, in what many knew would be her final Olympics, she showed the world why her name is etched among the greatest alpine skiers ever. Yet fate, with all its indiscriminate cruelty, had something more brutal in store, a collision not just with snow and gravity, but with her own mortality. A race, a moment, a crash. It was early in the women's downhill on February 8, 2026, at the Milano Cortina Winter Olympics, just 13 seconds into her run, stunning everyone watching. Vonn clipped a gate. 1 millisecond, she was a bullet on snow. The next, she was airborne, spinning, out of control. What happened next changed everything. The crash was not just violent, it was catastrophic. Vonn sustained a complex fracture to her left tibia, and her right ankle shattered like glass. The force of it shattered more than bone, it unleashed a cascade of internal trauma that would threaten not just her Olympic dream but her very limb. Compartment syndrome, the silent threat. Most people, even many dedicated sports fans, have never heard of compartment syndrome. But within hours of the crash, doctors recognized the danger. After the break, Vonn's leg developed this condition, trauma so severe that swelling caused crushing pressure within the muscle compartments. Blood pooled, nerves and tissue starved, muscle fibers began to die. Left unchecked, the damage would spiral until the only medical solution was amputation. To understand this is to stand at the edge of one of medicine's most brutal crossroads, watch as life bleeds through shattered bone, all the way down to the wires of nerves and sinew. Vonn's leg was not merely broken, it was a battlefield. Without swift, precise intervention, the consequences would have been more than athletic, they would have been permanent. The surgeon who changed the script. Enter Dr. Tom Hackett, an orthopedic surgeon with Team USA. Ironically, he was in Italy only because Vonn had suffered a torn ACL just days before, an injury that many believed would have kept her sidelined. Her audacious decision to compete despite that tear now seemed both reckless and providential. When Vonn was rushed into the operating room, Hackett performed a fasciotomy, an emergency procedure that, in layman's terms, means cutting open the tight compartments of the leg to let it breathe, to stop the choking pressure, to salvage what was still alive. He operated not once, but repeatedly, piecing together a limb that was, in her words, in pieces. He filleted it open, Vonn said later, a stark, almost cinematic phrase. But this wasn't a movie. This was real, and it was her life. From hospital bed to reality. After nearly 2 weeks in an Italian hospital, often sedated, often in agony, and twice on the brink, Vonn was finally well enough to leave. But the story did not end with a discharge from the hospital, it began there. Blood loss had been severe enough to require a transfusion. She returned to the US in a wheelchair, broken yet intact. At 41, with a long road of recovery ahead, She spoke not of defeat but of determination. The bones in her leg may take a year to heal. She faces more surgery, not just to reconstruct bone, but to address the torn ACL that brought Hackett to Italy in the first place. Tall tales of triumph often skip the chapters that matter most: the pain, the numbness, the dark hours where progress feels invisible. But Vonn didn't skip them. She embraced the full narrative, even the parts that make others flinch. A champion's reflection. "I'd rather go down swinging than not try at all," she said. A simple sentence, but one heavy with the weight of her choices. There's a certain poetry in lights and flashes and medals, but there's another kind of poetry, the brutal, unpolished kind, that lives only in pain and persistence. Vonn doesn't just compete for glory or records. She competes because she knows what it means to stare danger in the face and choose to move forward anyway. That's why her injury, as excruciating as it was, has struck a chord with so many beyond alpine skiing. It's not just a physical injury, it becomes a mirror for anyone who has ever felt broken, beaten down, or faced with odds so steep that turning back looks easier. Pain, purpose, and perseverance. In her recovery journey, there's an underlying theme that echoes far outside the snowline slopes of Cortina d'Ampezzo. It's a story of human will, the capacity to take pain, stare at possibility, and say yes, I will. When we tear a muscle, it heals. When we break a bone, it knits itself back together. When we suffer a blow to the heart or spirit, phrases like recovery and journey can feel shallow, empty words. But watching someone like Vonn transcend that, someone who has faced physical near ruin and yet still speaks of hope, it transforms journey into something real. She doesn't minimize the pain. She doesn't romanticize suffering. She acknowledges the terror, the realization that she almost lost a part of her body entirely. Yet she finds gratitude, for the surgeon who was there, almost by chance, for the body that, despite everything, is still hers, and for the lesson that even when gravity slams you into the ground at 80 miles per hour, your spirit can still soar.